So let me pull up. We're going to work from, you know what, and next time I should probably recommend either I bring or you bring a copy of the FHA VA addendum so you can look at it. But we're in a small enough room, you should be able to see it just fine. We're all pretty familiar with the verbiage that's in there, I think, anyway. But there's a few little maybe catches, and then we're going to talk about ways that you can word the closing costs requests, because 90% of the time when you're using FHA VA, you're asking the seller to pay closing costs of some sort, right? Some type of contribution. So that's what we do. So this is the FHA VA addendum to the contract. Remember, we have the FA Va contract, which is the main body of this, and then this is going to reference paragraphs within that we have to do. And I was telling the group last night when I was teaching this that it's kind of funny because I haven't looked at this in a while. So I haven't been doing all of a sudden, hey, I'm going to teach it. I better make sure I know what I'm teaching, right? So I went to go check it out, and there is something that's changed since when I was actively selling that was news to me. So again, you learn something new every day. So we'll go over that. First part, definitions. Our government guy will tell us they love definitions. As many acronyms as you can throw into a government agency. That's perfect. All right. So it's acronym U. You have to go to a class just to learn all the acronyms, right? Okay. So that's just kind of defining who's who in these things. The cool thing is this is a combined rider, meaning you would use this if you're using FHA or VA financing. You're just going to check the right box. Okay, so there are some initial things that apply. The definitions apply to both. And inspections and appraisal. What this is an important concept to grasp, all right, in paragraph 2, because in addition to the requirements of paragraph 12 of the contract, what paragraph 12 is the repair addendum portion, or the repair portion of the FA Va contract. Sellers should comply with applicable FHA or VA regulations regarding termite inspection, roof inspection, and appraisal repairs, collectively called appraisal repairs. The cost of the seller for appraisal repairs shall not exceed. Now, this is a negotiable item. This isn't something that needs to be filled in. All right. I think in the past, the previous version of this had a default of $250 or something in there. Yeah. So this is the newest version. This is, hey, good morning. This is the 2015 version that does not have a default. So know that. So if there's no default, then default's to 0, right? If it's left blank. All right. And we really don't want to leave blanks anyway. If there's a default in it, in the parentheses afterwards, I'm okay with you leaving it blank, but better safe than sorry, put something in, all right? And so here, this becomes a negotiable item. What this is, you can have an as-is contract on an FHA, and the appraiser will come in after the fact, right, and say, hey, I don't care what your appraiser or your home inspector said. I don't like, in fact, somebody had a copy of a picture on his phone last night of a VA appraisal that just happened to him, and there was a 2-inch piece of fascia board that was unpainted, just a 2-inch portion of it, and he dinged it, right? Needed to be painted, right? So it's that type of stuff. If you can think, safety and is the main thing, right? So when a conventional appraiser could care less if there's a broken window pane, an FHA or a VA appraiser will care. All right, conventional appraisal may not care that there's some peeling paint on the exterior. An FHA and a VA appraiser will. All right, so this supersedes or goes above and beyond the repair limits that you've dialogued about in paragraph 12, whether it be an as-is, which means repair limits are 0, right, or standard contract where you've got some predetermined 1%, 1.5%, or whatever built in, okay? So that means if an appraiser comes along and says that we have to repair these things, then the seller will agree up to this maximum to repair those items. It's not, they've already agreed in advance that here's where it is. Now, where do the negotiations come in? Negotiations come in because now the seller a lot of times have this vision of, oh, an appraiser is going to tear my house apart. I don't want to do FHA, I don't want to do VA because they're terrible. It's funny, way back in '93 when I got in the business, right, and I was selling mostly FHA type homes, so I was using FHA financing, I started presenting offers and everybody's like pushing back on me, like, oh, no, I'm like, what? I mean, it's not like they see a stain in the carpet and say, hey, look, we can't loan money on this thing, because I had done several by then, but the perception in the marketplace was terrible. So I had to really fight because my buyers couldn't go any other way. So I had to really help educate, a lot of times the other agent, okay, to educate their seller to say, hey, look, let's step back a minute here. I've closed these deals, all right, and let's minimize this, but we're going to have something there, all right? Or even if you do put 0, that's fine, but we're going to have the discussion later if something comes up because, it's got to be covered, right? It's got to be fixed. So recommended amounts here, whatever you can negotiate. If you represent the buyer, try and get an amount in there that's going to be reasonable, especially you look around the house, all right? If you start seeing stuff like unpainted baseboard or unpainted fascia boards and stuff that an appraiser's gonna have an issue with, and say, hey, look, let's put an amount in here so we don't have to fight that fight later, right? But multiple offer situation, right? A listing agent's gonna look at that and say, well, we could be obligated comparing offer A to offer B, right? You may have to minimize that to try and get your offer accepted, all right? And then deal with it later, and that's okay because there's provisions on how do we deal with it later. All right, so just where that is a big difference in a conventional loan and an FHA VA appraisal loan. Okay, the main two things that we're going to talk appraisal amount, appraisal repairs, and then what we call the non-allowables. They're things that the seller must pay of the buyer's closing costs that a buyer's not allowed to pay on an FHA or a VA loan. Okay, so those are the 3 things. Question?
I have a situation where a home that I have a buyer, they were getting the inspection done on it, found a bunch of stuff, asked for the repairs, the seller isn't able to repair it.
Yep.
My buyer is willing to change their loan over to a 203K, which I believe is an FHA loan.
It is.
Do the repairs themselves.
Right.
Is something like this still necessary, and how does that?
Well, 203K would be a different situation because 203K, you're talking now, this is a repaired after the fact.
Right.
Right, it's a double appraisal. They appraise it in an as-is situation, then they do an appraisal fixed up, and here's a list of items that need to be fixed, and we put a pool of money away, and then it gets done after the fact, and so on and so forth. So you still would use this addendum, all right, but you're probably going to say, hey, look, that repair stuff right now doesn't apply because we're going, and that would be a discussion you'd have with your lender as well.
Right.
This form is going to be highly sought after by your lender. Okay, the lender's going to want an FHA or VA addendum if you're using FHA VA financing. The lenders mandate that they have this in their file, right? And so that would be discussion. Hey, look, since we're going this 203K route, what do we now need? All right, is this just kind of like we put a number there and then it supersedes it because we're obviously going to exceed that? But and they may say, well, don't worry about it because really the seller's not fixing anything on the front side. We're waiting to do that later, and we know that, or FHA knows that. Okay, so a little bit different scenario, but good question. Okay, fair enough. So everybody okay with you just putting a repair amount in? It's a negotiable item. Put something in there. 250 is a good spot to start if you're looking for, hey, look, give me a rule of thumb. And who was it? My son Joseph, I think, was telling me what rule of thumb. Anybody remember where rule of thumb came from? He told me. He looked it up or found out. He was reading something where that thought came from. I'll have to look that up again. I just thought about that. That's right. What's that?
So he probably just Googled.
He probably did. I'm sure. Exactly. Right. Or so. All right. So check if applicable. So paragraph 3, FHA finance. So we're going to use FHA finance. We would check obviously box 3 or paragraph 3, and this first part basically says the house has to appraise. Okay? Let's take a little sidebar for a moment and talk about appraisals and appraisal contingencies and whether or not there's an out in our contract for a home that doesn't appraise. The reality is the FAR contract in and of itself does not have a contingency that says if it doesn't appraise, I can cancel the contract. Now, that being said, the lender may say, hey, because it didn't appraise, I can't lend money, so then you use the financing contingency to get out, right? But there is no automatic, hey, we were at purchase price of 180 and it appraised for 170, so now we're going to cancel. But I just had this long discussion on a higher end property with one of our agents over the weekend, 1.2, right? And the borrower wants to borrow X amount of dollars, and the seller's concerned that it doesn't appraise and so on and so forth. So I said, well, if the buyer's agent was that concerned about an appraisal and having an out based upon the appraisal, then there is an appraisal contingency, just like we're using paragraph or whatever this, the multiple choice addendum that we have. There is an appraisal contingency that you can add to the contract that says, hey, look, this offer is contingent on the house appraising, okay? Now, that's on conventional regular stuff, right? Because the lender could say, all right, hey, yeah, your purchase price is 180, it appraised for 170, but we're still comfortable because we're still only the amount of loan the buyer's seeking. We're comfortable with 80% of 170. We're lending less than or equal to 80% of 170, the actual value according to the appraisal. So we're good. I'm not going to give you a denial letter. And so the other guy's saying, wait, I want to buy it for 180 because it didn't appraise. And you're saying the contract doesn't say that. All right? If you get a denial letter, it says that. All right? But if without a denial letter, so if you want an offer to be contingent upon appraisal, then you better use that appraisal contingency. Okay? Fair enough? Are you with me?
So let me just make sure I'm understanding.
Yep.
Are you saying that some lenders will, even if the home doesn't appraise for the purchase price?
Yep. Still be okay with lending money.
Depending on
Right.
how much,
Yeah. Because now they may issue a denial letter based upon that, all right? But they could say, hey, look, the guy was putting $40,000 down anyway, so 40 off of 170 or off of 180 is still 140. 140 divided by 170, we're still below 80% loan to value, which is where we want to be in our safety zone, all right? Our actuaries tell us that we're a better position there, so we're okay with it, even though it didn't appraise for purchase price. All right, are you with me?
Yeah, I've never.
Thought about that concept.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I wondered that, but is that more customary with like smaller, like brokers versus like a bigger bank? Like Chase?
Well, no. I mean, no. It's because they're based on loan to value. That's what LTV stands for, right? And value in their eyes is the appraised value, not the purchase price. All right. Matter of fact, in their eyes, it's the lesser of the two. All right, because it appraises for more doesn't know we'll go with purchase price. They're going to choose the lesser of the two. But as long as they're okay with their loan compared to the value that they have set through their appraiser being all right, they won't necessarily automatically deny a loan because it didn't appraise for purchase price. So if you want your offer, if your buyer wants their offer contingent upon it appraising, then you better use, okay, the appraisal contingency that says that. Now, all that being said, on FHA and VA, we have an appraisal contingency, okay? It says very clearly in paragraph 3 that this FHA will not lend money, all right, unless it's going to appraise for, and here you will put the purchase price. So in our case, we're doing 180 and we're using FHA financing. Here you put 180, all right? And there's our out. That is like an appraisal contingency, all right? Matter of fact, we'll learn later in the VA, there is no blank to fill in here. It just says for the purchase price. It automatically defaults to it better appraise for the whole purchase price. All right, so go ahead.
I don't want to deviate.
No, that's all right.
Okay, but if it's a convention.
Yep.
And you're using the as is.
Yep.
Would you be covered, or is it sufficient to put it in the other terms at the end of the contract?
Yep.
You know, appraisal must come in at value needed.
Sure, you can write that in there as well. You know, the addendum's there, so you can use that as where I'm sure there's logic behind the verbiage. I haven't looked at the verbiage in the appraisal contingency recently. Is it good? Yeah. So, for me, if the addendum's there.
The reason that they do that with the addendums to make you add another sheet is to avoid our agents from the population from writing contracts like a lawyer and acting as a lawyer where you're writing terms out.
Right.
If you've got one already, you should use the one that's there.
That's a great piece of advice that Jim
really
just
what
said.
it is.
All right, and you guys get that because if there is a contingency or if there is an addendum that satisfies what we're trying to do, use it because courts are not real hip on us doing too much in the additional terms. Because then we become accused of writing the contract, right? Because we're allowed to fill in a predetermined contract, but we cannot just write a contract on our own. Only attorneys can do that, right? So then we get accused of practicing law without a license and so on and so forth. So there's that gray area. That's why they don't give you 48 lines on that additional terms. They try and shrink that down. Hey, good morning. All right, to keep that in line. Fair enough? Okay, good question though. All right, so here you're gonna put in just the purchase price, right, on FHA. So it has to appraise for, and now there's our appraisal contingency. So we do have an out on FHA, all right, built in there. Fees and prepayments. Here is what we call the prepaid section. All right, so by the way, just real quickly, let's recap. We got 2 issues on appraisal. We got appraisal repairs that may come up as a result of the appraisal, and we got appraisal value, all right, that may cause us to have some issues with this deal, all right? The third thing, as I told you, is what we in the industry is being known as non-allowables. And the term non-allowables comes from things the buyer is not allowed to pay in their closing costs. Traditional buyer costs that they now shift from the buyer side to the seller side when you're using FHA or VA financing. Now, in the past, this is where it used to be the same. I learned when I read this, okay, that it's not the same anymore. FHA is significantly lower. It used to have a longer list. The only non-allowable for an FHA loan, let's read it, all right, purchaser shall pay all loan expenses, all right, except, here's the shift, right, tax service fee, all right, if charged by buyer's lender, that shall be paid by seller up to a maximum of. That's the only non-allowable on FHA now, all right. VA is different. We'll read that in a minute. But the VA used to be, the FHA used to be the same as the VA. Doc prep, underwriting fee, and all these kind of things that we see. But right now, the only non-allowable for FHA is the tax service fee, all right, which you can check with, go back to some old HUDs. Kevin Overstreet was in the room last night, so he said anywhere from $100 to $200. You know, your lender would be a good person to, hey, look, you know, what are they going to put on their GFE, their good faith estimate, that's going to reflect, you know, that amount. But you want to put an amount in there that's going to cover that. So what you're doing is you're disclosing, can't reach it, sorry. You're disclosing to the seller, hey, look, here's an additional cost that you're going to have to bear. Because by law, you have to. I mean, the buyer cannot allowed to pay it, all right, and the lender charges it. Fair enough? Appraisal repairs, here's what this kind of covers. What happens if we had, let's say we had $250 up here, right, that they agreed to, and it comes in at $700, all right, there's this, and this. The appraiser comes back what they call VCs, valuation contingencies, right? And so they would say, hey, look, we need these fixed before closing. The appraiser said that, not the home inspector, but the appraiser, right? And it came out to $700 worth of stuff, and the seller only agreed to $250. Then what happens, you deliver that to the seller, and the seller has 3 days in the contract to tell us what they're gonna do. They're gonna pay the rest, they're gonna pay the whole $700, they're only going to pay the $250, right? And you have to cover the rest, all right? Or what's going to happen, right? And then the buyer has 3 days after the seller gets back to them to then respond and say, okay, I agree, we'll pay the extra $450 or whatever, and renegotiate or cancel the deal, all right? But the buyer does have an out if the appraisal repairs exceed the appraisal repair limit, then the buyer has an out as well, okay? So that's there, all right? Certification, everybody agrees that, you know, everybody's doing this to the best of their knowledge, and yada, yada, yada. No one's doing handy thing, hanky-panky, okay? That's paragraph C. Cool with FHA? The only non-allowable is tax service fee, all right, on FHA. Game changes a little bit. Pretty much same type of concept with VA, all right? We're going to use this. This is the one that basically says that has to appraise. Now, I'm guessing there's no blank in this one, right? This one's saying it has to appraise for purchase price. So it automatically defaults where it's built in. So it has to appraise for purchase price on a VA. Fees and prepayments. Now here's where it changes. Okay, let's go to, you guys, can you see this subparagraph A down here? Okay. Fees and prepayments. Seller shall pay for the WD. Now it's no longer just tax service fee. Look, on VA, for the WDO inspection, not repairs necessarily, but WDO inspection, the $45, $75, whatever your inspectors, your termite guys charging, and tax service fee, so that's what was in FHA, underwriting, and doc prep fees required by, that's a lot, that's a big difference, all right? Because doc prep and underwriting fees, and by the way, there's no up to a maximum of that, there's no limit here, right? Remember the other one we had to put in like, yeah, let's give what it would say, let's say $200, $150 or whatever. This is a blank check that the seller's agreeing to pay. So, good news if you're the buyer's agent, bad news if you're the listing agent, right? That's why you have to say, hey, look, we got to do something here, time out. Okay, we got to get an estimate of what are we talking about here? We talking about $500? We talking about $1,500? Right? It makes a difference in my net sheet coming in okay, right? And so you want to, in somewhere, additional terms, if you're representing the seller, say, hey, look, well, we'll talk about that. You got to say, hey, look, we got to put a cap on this somewhere, okay? And say, hey, look, the maximum, you know, contribution to these is going to be X. I don't want the lender getting a hold of this and say, hey, they didn't cap it. I decided my doc prep fee is, you know, $3,000, right? Exactly. There's no limit. There's, what the seller has to pay, right? And so you got to be very careful in that situation to do it, all right? And then going on, same thing with appraisal repairs. It gives us the 3 days to, negotiate the difference if the appraisal repairs are bigger than or come in and don't want to be fixed, and so on and so forth, just like we did FHA, okay?
So when you send the listing agent, the buyer's agent,
Yep.
the listing agent, the appraisal repair report,
Yep.
all you have to send is the report, not an addendum with the report.
Well, you'll want to addend. You always, on any repairs, whether they be for any type of repair, you want to get an agreement, right? So you want all parties to sign off, hey, look, this is what's going to be fixed. Sellers are going to do this, A, B, C, and D, right? And so I would do the same thing here. You could deliver the report and say, hey, look, we got to negotiate because we've exceeded the 250. We got to come up with what's going to happen or whatever, or even we're within the 250. Let's say, hey, look, it was real small. It should fall under the 250, but I still want you to sign off saying that you recognize that before closing, that board's got to be painted, right? And then you bam, 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 bam. By the way, real quick word, I am probably the least handy guy in the world, but I learned real quickly to carry some stuff in my trunk. All right. I was at the time meeting a lot of the appraisers out there. All right. And so I'd go out there and they're like looking around and like, oh yeah, I'm going to have an issue with that. Like what? What's your issue? All right. Well, that if we could just get that, paint. So I dig around in the garage and there's usually a spare can of paint for the exterior stuff. And I'd say, hey, there's stuff. Can I just, I had some sandpaper, carried a brush, got up there and climbed on whatever I could. They'd say, you good now? Yeah, we're good. Hey, seriously, I'd try to say, let's take care of it now. Can we leave that off? All right, why would you do that? Well, because I wanted to close deals. Okay, so do whatever it takes to make it happen. So, but yes, so there still is that provision in here if we exceed the appraisal repair limit. Fair enough? Cool. Now, real quickly, this is just election to proceed with the contract. That means if it doesn't appraise and everybody agrees to still proceed and the lender's okay with it, you still have the election to proceed. If it doesn't appraise, all right. If everybody's okay with it and they work it out on the lender side, but you don't have to. That's right, you're good. We don't have to proceed, right? We have that appraisal contingency there. Now, here's the big, okay, so with closing costs and that extra doc prep underwriting fee and all that kind of stuff, how does a seller know what their maximum exposure is, right? Well, again, depends on who you represent, how you're going to write these things. Now, remember, if you guys are coming from other offices where transaction brokerage was mandated, we're not one of those, all right? I'm a single agent guy, big fan of single agency whenever possible. I like to represent my client with my full vigor, all right? And so I used to write contracts, well, let me tell you, pretty tough, and then I got tired of fighting the fight, and so I decided to, how about this? How about X? Let's do that. All right. So, how do I word seller contribution, right? Well, sellers should contribute $3,000 towards buyer's closing costs and or prepaids. Okay, that's where I used to leave it, right? I would forget this part. Sellers should contribute $3,000 towards buyer's closing costs or prepaids. Then I get to closing, right? I get the HUD statement, preliminary HUD, and I represented the buyer. And I tell the title company, hey, you know what? You're missing. You only have $3,000 there. It should actually be a total of $4,200. And they're like, what? The contract says $3,000. I said, no, it says $3,000 of the buyer's closing costs. The FHA addendum shifted $1,200 of those costs to the seller. So those are not buyer's costs. Those are seller's costs now, right? So I'd get to the closing table, and then all of a sudden she'd go, oh, okay, I see what you're doing. Yeah, you're right. And the lender would approve it. Next thing you know, the listing agent wouldn't even pay attention till we're at the closing table. And they're like, hey, well, I'm adding these up, and we're at the closing table, right? I'm adding, and this is like $4,200, and the contract said $3,000. I said, well, no, it said $3,000, but that was of the buyer's costs. But we also have doc prep, and now back then FHA had the same agreement as VA, all right, where doc prep, underwriting, all tax service, and all those kind of things. I'd say, oh yeah, that's really the seller's cost now. So yeah, in essence, you're paying $4,200, but you knew that. Well, I didn't know that. Well, yeah, you did. When you signed the FHA addendum, the seller knew that. Well, what are we going to do? I told the seller 3,000 max. I said, I didn't tell the seller anything. What are you going to do, right? And they're like, what? And we're sitting at the table and everybody's there, right? You know, buyers and sellers are looking at each other, right? And they're, you know, and I'm looking at the agent and I said, I didn't care if I made friends, by the way. I wasn't looking to recruit them at the time. All right, right? And so I just said, hey, look, I don't know if I were you, man. If you told them X and it ends up being X plus 1,200, someone's got to make up that 1,200. If it were me, I'd probably do it myself and make it right. All right? Yeah, but I said, hey, you know, whatever, okay? So I've made mistakes like this, and when I learned that it cost me $1,200, I didn't forget it next time. Okay, you know what I mean? It's like, Dad, I'm going to keep an eye out, or you better keep an eye out on the contract I write, all right? Okay, when McDougal brings an offer, you know, not listing agent beware, whatever that, how do you say that in Latin? Okay, it's not caveat emptor, it's listing agent datus emptor. Okay, so with that in mind, you know, how do we you know get that? So I used to do that. So then I said, you know what? I'm tired of fighting this. See, every time you know, these people didn't understand the concept, right? The lenders did, the title agents got it, and then they were the only ones. So I said, okay, let me be nice to you. All right, let me shout it from the mountaintop. This amount is in addition to the normal closing costs associated to a seller in closing an FHA/VA loan, whatever you're going to put in there. I'm saying, look, I'm going to be even nicer to you. All right, I'm going to tell you to warn your client that the $1,200, or even if it's just the tax service fee in this case, the $200, is not included in this $3,000. This is in addition to that. I'm telling you, right? And so hopefully they get it at that point. Now with that verbiage, you're good. Now, another way to do this, if you want to be really nice, you could put, and say it's VA and you know it's going to be $1,200 worth of that other junk, right? Then you put $4,200 and you say this amount is inclusive, all right, of the VA non-allowables or whatever you want to word it. You can be extra nice if you want to do it. Now for me, I liked it this way, especially multiple offer situation, because they may make the mistake of comparing offer A to offer B and say, well, we're at 108 minus 3,000 on this one, and we're at 104 or 102 minus no closing costs on this one, so actually we're still better, and then they end up being $1,200 shy. But that's not my problem, that's their problem, right? And so I like to make it look better, but like I said, I'm still a firm believer you could leave this sentence out and still have a very viable case and say, hey, look, man, my job's not to look after your seller. I don't have a fiduciary with them. I don't know them from Adam. That's why I don't like being a transaction broker, because I don't like having a fiduciary to somebody I don't know, right? My buyer's been in my car for 6 weeks. I know them, right? Okay, all right? The seller, you know, I have no fiduciary with. I have no clue who they are, all right? Are you with me? So, but again, if you want to be nice and if you want to be really nice, go ahead and do the whole ball of wax in there, all right? If you want to, if you're not confrontational, if you're a lover, not a fighter, all right, then do it that way. If you're truly a fighter and never a lover, then forget this sentence altogether, all right, and just say, you know what, too bad, so sad, all right. I don't know and use that line. I don't know. If it were me, I'd make it up to my client and stare at it, all right. Say, have at it. Have a great day. So it is harsh, but you know what? It's a harsh world. You know, think it's not harsh. Okay, go live to another day. All right, exactly.